Um, Miles. Miles comes from, as I say, a very distinguished family, and has been working in this area and living in this area, I think, since he was born. He is the sort of natural go-to person in Ullswater for knowledge about anything that's taken place in the community. He's professionally been a land agent, a member of the Royal Chartered Quantity Surveyors, has worked for 45 years, has been nominated during that time as a member of the Lake District National Park by the Environment Secretary. He's had chairman roles. He's been the past chairman of the County Land and Business Association. He's a current chairman of Barton and Pooley Bridge Parish Council. I think it's difficult to find someone who knows more about the local scene than Miles. So it's a great privilege to have him with us tonight. I'm not quite sure how long he will speak for, probably, I don't know, 40, 45 minutes or whatever. We'll have our Q&A afterwards, and then, yeah, and then we'll proceed. So welcome to you all. I'll pass the floor to Miles, and I think Anne will probably mute everyone, and look forward to the talk very much. Thank you very much. Over to you, Miles.
Well, thank you. Embarrassing remarks, Tim, but nevertheless, much appreciated. Thank you. Exaggerating my talents, but here we are. Anyway, we did have a few technical issues this afternoon, so I just hope we can manage without too much difficulty while I try and share the screen with you all, which is the first thing to do. So just bear with me a little bit. Now, I hope and think you can all see that. Tim, can you hear me?
It's great. Yes, Miles.
Yes, can you all see that?
Yeah, see that.
I assume you can see my screen. That's the main thing. You can't see me, which is better. Anyway, good evening, and thank you for inviting me to tell this fascinating story, which is really often forgotten about, or even people don't know about it. And it's a true David and Goliath story. The good folk of the Ullswater Valley massed against the mighty Corporation of Manchester Waterworks. This all goes back to the 1960s, when, of course, there wasn't the conservation lobby there is now. The Friends of the Lake District existed, but they weren't as influential as they have become. So it was down to the local residents and lovers of the Lake District to stand up and fight this invasion of the national park. And I often wonder, when people come and look at this commemorative plaque, which is by the steamer house in Pooley Bridge, I often think they wonder what on earth this was about, although there is an explanation next door. And you'll note the Latin inscription at the foot, which I'm sure you'll all be familiar with, but I'll be asking for translations afterwards, so you can get to work on that one. So, go away, come again another day if you will. With these words, Norman Lord Birkett, seen here in his noble robes, closed what is arguably one of the finest speeches in modern parliamentary history. But to start at the beginning, William Norman Birkett was born in Ulverston on the 6th of September 1883 and died in London on the 10th of February 1962, a sadly relevant date, which we'll come back to later. So here he is as a young lawyer, and also on the right, in older years, an interesting cartoon by Sir David Lowe. Although Ulverston was then in Lancashire, he was certainly a passionate lakelander who loved and cherished the lakes, described in his famous speech as so small, so lovely, and so vulnerable. Indeed, he subsequently bought a farm in Ennerdale to save it from development. The son of drapers with whom he worked initially, he left school at 16, He was a Methodist preacher, president of the Cambridge University Union, Liberal MP, barrister, QC, Court of Appeal judge, and he was ennobled in 1958. He was described as one of the most prominent liberal barristers in the first half of the 20th century. And he was noted for his skill as an advocate, which helped him defend clients with apparently watertight cases against them, one of whom was Tony Mancini, seen here on the left, who was accused in a notorious 1934 Brighton trunk murder case, said to be Birkett's greatest triumph in a capital case. Violet Kay, on the right here, was a prostitute. Her torso was found in a trunk in Brighton, her legs in a suitcase at King's Cross, but her head and arms were never found. So I wonder how she was identified. Anyway, thanks to Birkett's advocacy, Mancini was acquitted, but needless to say, he confessed to his guilt on his deathbed. A fellow barrister remarked at the time, "If it had ever been my lot to decide to cut up a lady in small pieces and put her in an unwanted suitcase, I should, without hesitation, have placed my future in Norman Birkett's hands. He would have satisfied the jury that A, I was not there, B, even if I was, I did not cut the lady up, and C, that if I did, she had thoroughly deserved it anyway." He was also an alternate British judge of the Nuremberg trials of the German war criminals. And you can see him here, second from the left. So our David and Goliath story starts properly in September 1961. In that month, Manchester announced through a press release, would you believe it, its intention to take water from Ullswater, and so the battle commenced. The proposal was to build a weir at Pooley Bridge where the lake runs into the River Emont and pump the water into Haweswater through a tunnel driven through the fell side. The weir would raise the level of the lake by some 3 feet, which may not seem a lot, but it would affect the roads around the lake and the many boathouses, and also would have caused an unsightly tide mark on the lake as the water levels fluctuated. So the Ullswater Preservation Society sprang into action. The society was formed in the 1930s with the idea of buying Glencoyne Park near Air Force, you'll be familiar with that, to prevent a proposed housing development, would you believe it? Unthinkable today, but happily it came to nothing. So in 1958, the society was resurrected, the aims being to preserve the traditional character of Lakeland, maintain its amenities for residents and visitors, protect its wildlife, and to purchase land or foreshores. Somewhat ambitious aim, which was never actually implemented. Excuse me. So in the 1960s, the members of the society, some of whom are shown here meeting with the corporation, included on the left here, Stafford Howard, who was the chairman, who inherited Greystoke Castle in 1950 and set about restoring the castle and the estate, which, like so many rural estates, had been taken over by the army in the Second World War as a tank training area, as of course was much of the Lowther estate. This caused considerable damage to the land and to the castle, which was used as a prisoner of war camp. On the right, here is Major Hazel of Dale, Maine, a lovely picture of him in his full shooting attire. He was one of the last proper Edwardian squires with a passion for forestry and land management. I was a young land agent when I first met him, by which time he was deaf as a post, and I remember bellowing into his ear the benefits of making silage, only to be rebuffed, "I don't think so." Also actively involved was Alec Helm from Broom Hall Farm, seen here on the left. He's a man of very strongly held opinions, and he lobbied energetically for the cause, and in fact gave evidence in person to the subsequent public inquiry. my somewhat eccentric aunt, Jean MacInnes, who's seen here in rather typical mood on the right. She wasn't a member of the committee, but she was a vociferous and long-standing member of Cumberland County Council and the Lake District Special Planning Board, as it then was. I'm told she arrived at the public inquiry, which followed these discussions, armed with sheaves of paper containing detailed and probably unintelligible measurements of the lake levels taken over periods of months. And I seem to hear that the corporation barristers were much more anxious about what she might come up with, being somewhat of a loose cannon when giving her evidence, than all the learned counsels raised against them. On the left, here's my father, Gurney, and he was also secretary of the Lakes Defence Coordinating Committee, which was subsequently established to provide a unified response to any future proposals for the extraction of water from the Lake District. When my father died, we found a bank account with some money in it, and I'm sure he and the rest of his committee would have been very pleased to know that we were able to put it to use to make a contribution towards the costs of the Ullswater Way heritage trails installations, which you'll all be familiar with. And when my family moved to Beulah, just outside Purley Bridge, with its views over the lake, a friend remarked to him, "I can see you defending the lakes very well from here." And on the right, we can see Eric Arneson, a well-known and much respected solicitor, Arneson and Co. in Penrith. And here's a very typical picture of him in later years, striding out to work from Stainton with his favourite Labrador. He provided sound and well-founded legal advice and was instrumental in drafting documents required for the fight. And he continued to walk into the Penrith office well into his 70s. We also mustn't forget Ted Short, MP, later to become Lord Glenamara of Glenridding. He was born in Walkup in 1912, and he was also the son of drapers. After a career in education, he became Labour MP for Newcastle Central in 1951 and was a minister in various departments under Harold Wilson. One of his duties as Postmaster General was to outlaw the offshore pirate radio stations, despite subsequently admitting that he did listen to some of them. And for many years, he had a holiday home in Glenridding, and hence his title. I haven't been able to find much detail about his involvement, but I know that he played a very active and influential role in the campaign. And he died aged 99 in 2012. Others involved were Willie Vane, MP, later the first Lord Inglewood, more of him anon, and the National Trust land agent, Cubby Ackland, who I understand treated the National Trust estate as his personal fiefdom. One of the justifiable concerns felt by the community was that there was a lack of prior consultation. This proposal and the bills were introduced at alarming speed. There were no facts and figures to back up their claims. And finally, there was this apparent and arrogant bully boy attitude by Manchester Corporation, not taking no respect to the local feelings of the local communities. As I said just now, the first time people knew about it was that when they issued a press release on the 1st of September 1961. They didn't get round to meeting the local authorities until the 18th of October, some 6 weeks later. And they didn't produce detailed documents in support of their claim until the 27th of November, 5 weeks after that. There was no prior consultation with the local authorities or the then Lake District Special Planning Board. As the matter developed, it was quite clear that Manchester's need wasn't proven, and in any event wasn't needed until the 1970s. The Manchester Corporation Water Bill was debated in the House of Lords on the 8th of February 1962, which was only 4 months since the corporation disclosed its intentions and only 10 weeks after the detailed proposals were disclosed. And in the debate that followed, this was emphasized. Lord Birkett himself said, "The matter has been put forward with undue haste." Lord Lonsdale said, "An utterly obnoxious fashion." Bishop Bloomer of Carlisle, "A grave error in judgment, scant consideration." In fact, other alternatives were put forward, and this was an interesting proposal to have estuary barrages on the Solway and Morecambe Bay and a motorway up the coast, which was an interesting proposal and of course would have been very helpful to the deprived areas of West Cumberland. But of course, nothing came of that, and I dare say nowadays wildlife and conservation bodies would object to such proposals, but it does seem a missed opportunity. Also discussed was the question of desalination. It was mentioned but not seriously considered. And you do really wonder why, after 60 years on, it's still not considered a viable way of providing water. So the case proceeded and a petition was quickly launched. And after only a few weeks, a target of 500,000 signatures were reached. And you think how remarkable that is when there was no social media, no internet, no emails. And as a teenager, I remember my sister and I sitting on the floor stuffing envelopes with petition forms. The Herald was a great supporter of the campaign, and here they report the first 250,000, but as I say, within a very short time, 500,000 signatures were presented to the government. Now, it wasn't only Ullswater they were looking at. They conceitedly thought they could flood this beautiful isolated valley in Bannisdale, not much known to anybody. It's just off the A6 between Shap and Kendal, where they were going to build a 40-foot high dam about where this hut shows, flooding the valley, and also a farmyard, which you can see, farmsteading, which you can see in the background. And indefensible to think of doing that now, but surely equally untenable even in the 1960s. We just have to consider what happened to Ullswater, where the village of Mardale was flooded in the 1930s, and Thirlmere, which destroyed 2 villages in 1894. And to paraphrase again from Lord Birkett's speech, both lovely lakes have been murdered. Dead water reservoirs, no human life, sterile shores. Afforestation prevents proper access to the fell side. And so we come to the House of Lords on the 6th of February 1962, and this was the decisive debate on the Manchester Corporation Water Bill, which included other procedures as well as other proposals, as well as the Ullswater and Bannisdale ones. So Lord Birkett submitted a motion to delete from the bill the clauses relating to Ullswater and Bannisdale. This was opposed by the Conservative leader of the House, Viscount Hailsham. The House was unusually crowded. To quote from H. Montgomery Hyde's biography of Lord Birkett, which was published in 1964, "There is nothing like a controversial, non-party subject with strong emotional overtones to fill a British legislative chamber." So speakers in support of the motion included Bishop Bloomer, Carlisle, on the left here, and to quote from his speech, "There has been a great error in judgment. The procedure by which it was prepared is disliked intensely. Scant consideration. Ullswater is one of the treasures of nature. We regard ourselves as guardians of this lovely place. For God the Creator's sake, and for the reputation of man, who does not live by bread alone, or even by bread and water, help us to guard it well. Must Manchester's sanitation experts insist on water closets which use 2.5 gallons every time the plug is pulled, when other areas manage with 2 gallons or even 1.5? In his subsequent speech, Lord Lonsdale commented, there might be something in the right reverend prelate's half-gallon per pull of the lavatory chain. So James, 6th Earl of Lonsdale on the right, and quote from his speech, Lord Birkett and I are both Lakelanders, born and bred. We have in our bones a love for the Lake District, for its mountains and all that it stands for. We have, as all the inhabitants of Cumberland and Westmoreland have, a love for our own land. Not a right to own it, to call it our own, to keep it selfishly and jealously, but a love for our homeland, and that we must defend. But above all, Lord Birkett, seen here, I think overlooking Ullswater, but I'd like to think it was anyway. So his biography comments, his voice was of such beauty, his enunciation so pure and clear, so polished and yet so effective, and his manners and gestures so perfect. Even Lord Hailsham, who supported the bill on behalf of the government, referred to his deeply felt and highly eloquent speech. So just to sum up his core arguments, firstly, until there is a national water policy, no individual authority or group of authorities should be allowed to preempt Ullswater. We are not satisfied that Manchester has made any real effort to find alternative sources. If it has, then we ought to know about them. We do not know whether the resources which are being utilised at the moment are being utilised fully. We do not know what steps are being taken to economise in the use of water. I would say that this is not an urgent matter. On their own case, they do not need any additional water until 1970. Shall Manchester Corporation be permitted to invade Lakeland for the third time, to impound its waters and pour them into its aqueducts or not? The question here is not saying that Manchesters will not have the water, but are we going to allow this in the national park? Manchester has given an undertaking that they will seek no more from Ullswater. It is not worth the paper it is written on. It can no more bind its successors than anyone else can. What steps are being taken in regard to the distillation of seawater? The government should produce a national survey and a national policy. So then we come to his closing remarks, and this was the crux of his speech and the one that won the day. Thus far and no farther. Go away. Come again another day if you will. But in the meantime, do that which ought to have been done before. Produce the hydrological data on which the House can come to a proper decision. Until that is done, you have no right whatever to invade the sanctity of a national park. So, victory. The House divided at 10 p.m. after 7.5 hours of debate, Lord Birkett having spoken for about half an hour. Lords Birkett and Lonsdale acted as tellers. 70 voted for the motion, 30 against. A really decisive result, almost a 50% majority, and remembering in particular that the motion was opposed by the government. Now, this is a sad moment. To paraphrase his biographer, his speech was a triumph and Ullswater was saved. He received many congratulatory messages and letters, the one that touched him most from the 5th-year girls at his old school in Barrow-in-Furness, who said it was the first time they'd been interested in the proceedings of Parliament. Next day, he was exhausted, complained of lumbago and stayed in bed. Later in the day, his wife found him on the floor and summoned the doctor, who called a specialist before he was transferred by ambulance to a London clinic. He was operated on at 11 p.m, and it was confirmed he was suffering from a fatal impairment of a vital blood vessel. He never recovered consciousness and died at the age of 79, 2 days after his Ullswater triumph. And I dare say he would have survived today. Then we get this very arrogant response from Manchester, only a week after the debate. They can stop gloating down at Ullswater, for we need that water and intend to get it. And you can see the oddly named Alderman Onion's cynical comment, but we love these lakes. However, that's not the end of the story. and dark clouds gathering again, rather like in this picture. An important consequence of the House of Lords decision was that Lord Jellicoe was appointed to chair a committee and produce a report on Manchester and the North West's need for further water supplies. His report in April 1963 produced the hydrological data demanded by Lord Birkett and confirmed that Manchester needed more water. It didn't rule out Ullswater, but stated that there should be no weir. And it's interesting to speculate that if Manchester had got its way and the bill had been passed, it's likely this report would never have been commissioned, and Manchester would have pursued its own piecemeal attacks on the Lake District and its water. So they came back with some revised proposals. This was in February 1964, and a draft order was produced, considerably influenced by the conclusions of the Jellicoe report. There was to be no weir, no Banisdale reservoir, the installations would be underground, and extraction would be restricted. So the good old Cumberland Westman Herald sprang into action once more. Shall this lovely lake become this shriveled pond? And we've got here a rather delightful poem written by Mrs. Cass, who was Alec Helm's secretary. I won't read it out to you now, but it's a very nicely written reflection on the case in hand. So the proposals included an intake in Gale Bay, which is just to the east of the steamer pier in Pulley Bridge. They were going to build an intake in the bay there, an aqueduct underground across the road, the Howtown Road, to a pumping station at Park Foot, and from there an aqueduct would be driven up the fell, through the fell side and into Ullswater. They weren't just looking at Ullswater. Even more outrageous was the proposal to drown the Lythe Valley, the Damson Valley and the Southern Lakes, which would have affected something like 35 homes and several farms. Again, they thought they could win the case with that one. So again, this was the valley that they would have flooded. Quite incredible to think they could even consider it in those days. So we come to the public inquiry into the proposals, which was held in June and July 1965. You remember William Hickey, no doubt, the gossip correspondent of the Daily Express, and certainly it attracted interest from the press all over the country. The public inquiry lasted for 19 days. There were 81 objections, 47 parties were represented or appeared in person. And come September, 20th September 1965, the inspector reported and recommended that Manchester's order should be approved, subject to no powers to extract water if the river flow was less than 43 million gallons per day, and that is now carefully recorded. The weir at the intake should prevent extraction when the lake level was below 475.4 feet above ordnance datum. Extraction was limited to 80 million gallons per day, and the lake level was at 475.7 feet. All somewhat technical, but perhaps my Aunt Jean's statistics did have some influence after all. So finally, the minister made his decision. Reported with a surprisingly imaginative headline from the Cumberland Westman Herald. By that time, Labour were in power, and the decision was made by Richard Crossman, who was Minister of Housing and Local Government. However, the battle still wasn't over. And here we have a picture of Lord Inglewood, William Fitzvane at the time, MP for Westmoreland. And in November 1966, he prepared a petition to the House of Lords, somewhat unusual procedure, proposing to limit the extraction powers to 15 years, not in perpetuity. So, locus standi. I'm sure the lawyers amongst us will know what this means. I hadn't a clue, so I had to ask Richard Inglewood, Lord Inglewood's son, and he had to explain it to me. It means that the applicant has to prove direct interest and personal involvement in the case in hand. And you'd think he would fulfill those two requirements, but no, rather surprisingly, his petition was rejected, even though he had been former MP for Westmoreland and was chairman of the Lakes Defence Coordinating Committee. So that came to nothing, but it did result in a further debate in the House of Lords on the 18th of January 1967. A proposal was put forward to annul the Manchester, Ullswater and Windermere Water Order 1966, and was possibly an opportunity for the Lords to express their views and for Lord Inglewood to put his case, even though in the event it wasn't voted on. We mustn't forget that water was also going to be taken from Windermere, but that's another story. So the proposals in 1966 were much reduced. There was to be no weir at Pooley Bridge, no dam in Bannersdale, and no duplicate Longsteddle pipeline, which had also been of great concern. However, the minister ruled that he couldn't impose the 15-year time limit that Lord Inglewood had proposed, but he went a step further, if you like, and he said that Manchester Corporation should produce a detailed programme for allowing public access to the land around Ullswater. However, it's debatable if this was ever implemented, as it is still a relatively dead lake, as is Thalmere. Incidentally, it's interesting to note that in his speech, Lord Kennet commented, "I think it is clear that in 50 years' time, we shall be relying very largely on desalted seawater. We are bound to." Well, that's a projection which hasn't come true yet. So the battle was over. Manchester's proposals were largely approved, and you wonder really why the fight was pursued so vigorously. But apart from the additional safeguards that were gained, I think it was largely out of a general mistrust, suspicion of their intentions, and fear that they would come back for more, despite assurances to the contrary. It might also have been a political move to put pressure on the then Labour government. But it also brought conservation issues to the forefront. Again, in the 60s, they weren't really given the emphasis that they have these days. So the idea of conservation was pushed forward not only for the government, but also to national and local politicians and the public at large. So we move over to the construction works, a tunnel to Ullswater, 1 3/4 mile under the fells. A huge underground pumping station was built at Parkfoot campsite. And so here we can see the intake in Gale Bay. Again, people don't realize that this is part of the extraction process. The water is high in this photograph, but it is quite clear that they can't pump water, physically can't pump water when the lake is low. And here's the entrance to the pumping station in the middle of the Parkfoot campsite. And you wonder if these people realize they're camping above a huge underground pumping station with massive turbines pumping the water through to Ullswater. So then the battle was over. Birkett had done his job. The scheme went forward, but much reduced. So how to commemorate his great exploits? Well, here is a memorable view from Birkett Fell, which is above Dockwray. I think it was known as Innominate Fell at the time. So a decision was taken to call it Birkett Fell. There's a lovely view of the lake. And a monument was built, lake stone carried up from the shore and built by boys and girls from the Outward Bound School. And here's a rather nicely, suitably weathered Westmoreland slate plaque. Then we had this plaque erected on Kalepot Crag, an unusual place for a monument, because of course you can only see it from the lake. But I think that was half the charm of it all. And you can see what it says. In memory of Norman William Birkett, Baron of Ulverston, he loved Ullswater. He strove to maintain its beauty for all to enjoy. And here's a picture of his grandson, Lord Thomas Birkett. I'd sometimes wonder how he got there, but presumably somebody took him on a boat. So there's a picture of him with his grandfather's memorial. Then, of course, we have the Birkett Trophy Regatta, a must-do event for serious yachties. It attracts 200 or 300 boats over the weekend, and they sail from one end of the lake to the other. And then another monument, which I started off my talk, was erected on the viewing platform just before you get to the steamer pier on the west side of the lake. And here we have on the left, the stone carver Pip Hall, who did this beautiful carving. Richard Inglewood, Lord Inglewood's son and heir, who made an opening speech. We've got Thomas Lord Birkett and myself. And Thomas Birkett spoke eloquently as well at the time of the unveiling. So to go back to the start, it's a beautiful piece of slate which Pip Hall found, I think, in Honister or possibly Burlington, and it's got this lovely ripple in it which makes a sort of lake effect. And I'm quite sure I needn't translate the epitaph below. It is, of course, Christopher Wren's epitaph from St. Paul's. If you seek his monument, look around you. And Richard Inglewood suggested this, and of course, couldn't be a more fitting tribute to not only Lord Birkett, but our forebears who worked so hard to fight off this proposal and to largely succeed. At the end of the day, Manchester got what he wanted, somewhat reduced, and the lake was preserved. So in the end, the outcome was pretty acceptable to everyone, worth the fight. So just remains for me to thank people who helped with this presentation. Richard Inglewood, who allowed me to look through his extensive archives, Janet Wedgwood, and then Sue Giles from the Ullswater Yacht Club, who provided those photographs we've seen, and my daughter Louisa, who probably unsuccessfully tried to improve my grammar. And finally, no such thing as a free lecture. We don't charge for these lectures, but we do welcome donations. The whole amount from today's talk will go to the Ullswater, Friends of the Ullswater Way, will be put to use promoting the valley, recording the history, and generally making sure people are aware of what this wonderful area has to offer. So it's easy to do. You'll have had a link on the joining instructions. You just need to go onto People's Fundraising and key in the Friends of the Ullswater Way. So thank you for that. I hope it's given you some idea of what happened in the 1960s. And if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. But first of all, I've got to try and get out of this and stop sharing the screen. If I can.
Maybe we can all unmute and give a suitable round of applause. I'm very lucky to have heard this part of this lecture before, and it's a continuous source of inspiration to me. And I'm hoping in our little group in the Friends of the Ullswater Way, we have people amongst us who have the same energy and passion for conservation and for trying to make sure what we see today has a life afterwards. I recall the phrase that you used, Miles, lakes have been murdered. I don't think I've heard that phrase before, but it's a very, very vivid image and goes right to the heart. Now, who would like to raise questions? I see hands raised from someone. I couldn't quite see who it was. it's very difficult one with so many people to actually see. Would the person who wants to speak please unmute and speak? Thank you. No.
I've got a question, Tim.
Thank you, Martin.
The debate was in the House of Lords. Does this mean that a bill had gone through the Commons?
No, I queried that when I was talking to Richard Ingwood. Apparently, there are procedures for the cases to go straight to the Lords. It may be because it's procedural or timetable or something, but no, it hadn't gone through the Commons, it went straight to the Lords. And apparently that does happen from time to time.
Well, we need to watch out for that.
I suppose so, yeah.
It's rather curious. When I was campaigner for the Friends of the Earth, I was heavily involved in bills linked to endangered species and habitats. And for some reason, the bills at that time on wildlife conservation, again, started their passage through the parliamentary system in the House of Lords. And to this day, I don't know why that happened. I don't even know whether the House of Commons itself was asked to make a judgment on this issue. It's very interesting. Any questions from you? Please speak up. It's very hard to find who's wants to put.
Can I raise a question from the chat?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's fine. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I just noticed in the chat that Duncan Scott has put in a note about desalination, which I think is quite interesting. I wonder if he's still here and he'd like to expand on it. Duncan Scott. Right. Yes, we could have. Radio 4 had a good discussion this afternoon with Mike Berners-Lee about the environmental cost of everything. This is what he said here, is that for every litre of water produced, another litre of polluted water enriched with chlorine and copper is created. It also uses lots of energy. I think that's what I've heard before, Miles, as well, that desalination, sadly, uses up too much energy to make it an efficient method.
Yeah, that might be wishful thinking on my part, perhaps.
Yes.
But what I think is sad in many ways is that the barrage across Morecambe Bay and the Solway wasn't pursued.
Yeah.
Okay, it would have an effect on the wildlife and everything, but it works quite well in Brittany. I think there's a large scheme, isn't there? Yeah. And if they built the barrages and a West Coast motorway, it really would have opened up West Cumbria, which was really in decline in the 60s. So you think of how much energy goes to waste 4 times a day when the tides come in and out. It really is a shame that there isn't more use made of that, I think.
Yes, no, there's a lot of good debates out there, aren't there?
Yeah.
And we've actually got somebody else on the chat. Somebody called John is saying, could we see the poem briefly shown in some way, please?
Right. Well, I could try and go back to it. I'm not sure. I'd have to start sharing the screen again, wouldn't I? Well, what I could do is I'll copy it and send it to Tim, and he can send it round to you all. So I'll do that because I think it'd be too complicated to go back to the. But she was a well-known writer, I think. My friend Sandy Helm may be here, and if so, he can tell us more about it. But she was secretary to Alec Helm. I think she wrote children's stories and also poems. So I will take I'll make sure I send it round to you tomorrow.
Do you know, Miles, if there's anything about the water consumption figures? Because of course, there's a lot of pressure on at the moment to reduce consumption of water because there's considered to be a water deficit. I mean, even in April here in Ullswater, people were having to, for the first time probably ever, water their gardens.
Yes, yeah.
And it's very, very rare for that. And I just wondered whether at the time when all this excitement was about using water from Ullswater, whether our habits have changed very much since then, and whether our water consumption actually is increasing all the time or decreasing. I don't know if there's anything you come across.
Not particularly, Tim. I mean, I don't think we flush 2.5 gallons every time we pull the plug, as the noble prelate referred to. And I think, in fact, probably water demand for Manchester was less than it was anticipated, because, of course, heavy industry was using less water. There is some talk that they don't take a lot of water out of the lake, but I'm told that's not right. I think they do. They do extract from it most of the time when they can. Of course, as in the last months when the water was so low, they wouldn't have been allowed. Wouldn't have been physically wouldn't be able to take it.
Anyone else wish to raise a question? Elizabeth Horsfall, I see. Yep. If you unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm dialing in from Edinburgh. I thought that was a really interesting talk. I was wondering if a city like Manchester at this point thought that they needed more access to water. What do you think they would do if that situation arose now?
Interesting. Yes, I don't think they'd be able to touch the Lake District, and obviously desalination has been put firmly back in its box. Building new reservoirs aren't really useful. So, good point. I'm not sure what they would do. Perhaps somebody else would have some ideas. But
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to put anyone on the spot. It was just I was just reflecting on that as you were talking. I just wondered if anybody might know what would happen now.
Yeah. I think more efficient use of water is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question? Sorry, but I don't see any questions coming through. Have you any idea how he managed to get 500,000 signatures on a petition? I mean, the actual population of the Lake District, and those physically within it, is what, 40,000, 42,000? Where are all these people where he got his petition from? Well,
it was nationwide. The Herald were very active in promoting it, and I think the national press picked it up. I suspect signatures came in from certainly all over the country and possibly all over the world. I don't know, but certainly they did achieve that very, very quickly. And I, as I said earlier, I remember stuffing envelopes with petition forms and sending them out to people. So no, it was a great achievement when you think no internet, no email, no social media. And I think it brought home the strength of feeling there was about it, which must have helped the case.
I remember my parents receiving that through the mail. They lived in just outside of Manchester, and signing it. They were great. They loved the Lake District and were happy to sign that.
Yeah.
Miles, I remember my parents had a sticker across the back window of their car. You remember those?
No, I don't.
Yes, I think mine did too.
It was no reservoir. I can remember it because you remember anything from that era. It said no reservoir on Ullswater, England's loveliest lake, and that was to put across your back window of your car. I remember that on the back window of Father's Humber all those years ago.
Yes, well, I don't remember that, but I mean, it's extraordinary how things have moved on, isn't it? I mean, to think of flooding Banisdale, let alone the Lythe Valley, it's just unthinkable. And to even think you might have a chance to do it is just, quite amazing.
Tim, I've got a question, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes.
It's John. I'm calling in from the other end of the country, from Sussex, near Brighton. Miles, thanks very much. I put it in the chat. It may be quite unrelated, but I'm just nosy. If you climb up Bordale Hawes, there's some pumping equipment at the top there as you head up onto High Street. And I just wondered if that's in any way related to this scheme.
No, I don't think so. There's Hazewater, which is above Hartsop, which supplies water to Penrith. And I suspect it'll be something to do with that, because there is an aqueduct which runs along the short, halfway along the fell side above Ullswater on the east side, and then takes water to Penrith. So I suspect it's something to do with that, because the tunnel through the lake is through the hill, sorry, is directly above Parkside. I remember going up there when they were building it, and you could hear the work going on deep into the mountain, echoing back up the fell.
Hazewater's been decommissioned.
Hey, has it? No, I didn't know
It's
that.
no longer a reservoir.
Isn't it? I didn't know that.
The dam, it was uneconomic to repair the dam, I believe.
All right, I didn't know that.
Thanks, Miles. That's really helpful.
Just to say that I've put in the chat a copy of the poem. So if you want to find it now, you can do that. Otherwise, we'll send it around afterwards as well. So you don't need to worry, Miles.
Thank you very much.
I've stolen the poem out of your presentation.
Good, right.
Can I ask yet another question? And that is, why do you think the Manchester Water Authority was so confident, even though the vote had gone so much against them, that their scheme would go through? I mean, it says something about power and who has the power.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's the arrogance of power. You know, the small country folk in the Lake District, you know, didn't count for much. Manchester came first. They needed the water, and they meant to have it. And of course, in the end, they got what they wanted, to a certain extent. You know, but if there hadn't been the fight, it would have been a disaster, because the Jellicoe report would never have been commissioned, and they'd probably gone ahead and flooded Bannisdale and tried to flood the Lythe Valley. So, you know, it was worth the fight. And I've never found out really what role the Friends of the Lake District took, because they were certainly existed in those days, but I haven't been able to find out how active they were in support of the case. I don't think they had the political clout that they have now.
Oh.
It might be worth asking to see their archives one day.
Mike Parsons has made a comment. Mike, would you like to speak?
Yes, the Hazewater Dam did used to supply water through to Ullswater until approximately 5 years ago, when the dam was removed. And but the original track pipeline is still there. And the person who asked about the pumping devices on Bordale Hawes, that's related to the Hazewater supply, but it's now dead.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Is my assumption, Miles, that because the Shelley, you know, unique endemic species to Ullswater is a protected species, that no one now is allowed to touch the water because of potential dangers to the population in the lake?
Yeah, maybe. Yes, I know there were very careful provisions made that fish wouldn't be trapped, wouldn't be sucked into the extraction, and there is a bypass because there is a gauging station just below where I live here, underneath Hull House Farm, which is used to record the flow of water, and I think there was a sort of a bypass for fish, so they didn't get caught up in that. Whether it still works or not, I don't know.
Are there any more questions?
8.
If not, can we all again thank Miles so much for his talk?
Thank you.
and just just to make an announcement that our next talk will take place on the 10th of June. It's going to be given by Jamie Lunt, who is the Archaeology and Cultural Advisor of the National Trust. He was heavily involved in the designation of the Lake District as a World Heritage Site, and he's going to be speaking on that theme and the role of the National Trust. That's on June the 10th. So with those few words, thank you very much, all of you, for joining the call. Thanks once again to Miles, and hopefully we'll see you again in a month's time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm enjoying it.